So just give us some context here and help us understand the situation in which we meet. How would you say that the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis and rising inflation have all impacted global climate goals this year?
Well, this is a very important question. We've never seen a time like this with the multiple crises that we have. And it's really obvious that in various ways they're having an impact on climate goals. You've seen what has happened with the energy situation in Europe, the rise in energy prices, the fact that some countries have had to go back to the use of coal, although they say that this will not ultimately affect their climate goals and the phasing out of coal, but it's still sad that we have to go back to that situation. So definitely the war in Ukraine is having an impact. More importantly, on food prices. We've seen food price inflation everywhere, both in rich countries as well as poor countries. And in some cases, issues of famine in the Horn of Africa, in parts of Ethiopia, even in the northeast part of my country, Nigeria. So there are trouble spots. And I think the fact that we've had this grain corridor in Ukraine has helped a little bit, but I'm extremely worried about the issue of food prices going into the future because availability of fertilizer is a problem for the next planting. And there's also the question of whether Ukraine will be able to plant all of its acreage. Estimates of their being able to plant only 40% means that next year we're going to continue to see pressure on food prices as well.
So help me understand the key considerations for policymakers here at COP, because coming into this meeting, it does seem that expectations for any kind of climate progress are actually quite low.
Well, one doesn't want to overstate or be too hopeful, but I do think we should come out of COP27 with some specifics on the financing side. And it's the famous 100 billion that was supposed to go to developing countries by 2020. That deadline has been missed several times. I hope that we will see progress here at COP27. We know that there are issues of discussions of loss and damage and how that will be handled. But I also understand that there may be some progress on announcing specific packages for developing countries and emerging markets to at least help them phase out of coal. So let's see. I expect some progress, but because of the situation we're in the world, I don't want to sound too hopeful. Now, let me just mention one thing. We are here to talk about finance, and people probably wonder, trade. How does trade come in? And I want to make a strong point. We are launching a report here that is a WTO flagship report on trade and climate that shows that, yes, most people think of trade as contributing to the climate, to the carbon emissions. But on the other hand, trade is fully part of the solution. And a missing piece in the plans to deal with climate change is the absence of consideration of the proper trade policies that should go into countries' nationally determined contributions. So there is a missing piece. We think there are aspects of trade policies that could be very helpful, and we want to make a point here that these should be incorporated.
Dr. Ngozi, how concerned are you by the global economic outlook into 2023? We've spoken about the supply chain issues. That's causing significant inflation in developed markets. How worried are you by prospects of a global recession next year?
I'm quite worried. I have to say that because you've seen the projections by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank on global growth, which are all going downwards. The same thing with respect to our projections for trade growth. We had projected last April that trade would grow at about 3.4%. Merchandise trade volumes will grow at about 3.4% in 2023. We've brought that forecast down to 1%. So this is quite worrying. And so I'm concerned. And the inflationary pressures don't seem to be letting up in many places. So of course, central banks are doing the best they can to try to fight inflation. But the more they raise interest rates, the more it becomes difficult for developing countries who have to service debt. The more it becomes difficult to prevent flight of capital out of those countries back to places like the US, Europe, and so on. The debt burden becomes much more difficult to deal with. So I am very worried, particularly for poorer countries. How are they going to cope? But also for poor people within rich countries.